with Al Groh. He won a ring as an assistant with the Giants. He was two-time ACC Coach of the Year with Virginia. Talking football for Westwood One these days. Al, thanks for your time. How are you?
Oh, I'm wonderful. Hey, anybody who loves football and loves competition is good this morning.
Well, expound upon that a little bit. It sounds like this game got you pretty fired up. Just your thoughts on the game. Expound upon what you started to say there.
Well, one thing is that, what it reminded me of a little bit is of like an NBA game with the Spurs when they were in their heyday, or recently the Warriors, and you're watching the game and it looks like the other team's got them beat, and you go into the final 4 minutes or so of that NBA game, all of a sudden one of those guys, all of a sudden they come down and like in 2 minutes time they hit 4 3-pointers, and the upset is over with. Well, it kind of reminded me of that last night, that finally the athletic ability, the speed, and the playmaking of Patrick Mahomes, they just couldn't hold it down. It's so hard to hold that team down for 60 minutes. And San Francisco fought them off for a long time with the power of their defensive line, but eventually the dam broke.
When you look at the end of the first half, as it was happening, were you comfortable with Shanahan taking it into the half with the tie? I was. David was not. Obviously, in retrospect, they probably should have tried to put some more points on there, even though they had it with Kittle before the pass interference. But just how they handled that from a clock management standpoint, Al, were you on board with what Shanahan was doing at the end of the first half?
You raise a really good point, and yes, I was, for this reason. First of all, if you had said to Kyle Shanahan or any fan, what do you think the odds are that you're going to hold Patrick Mahomes to 10 points in the first half? I think any coach would buy that, sign the contract for that. And so all of a sudden he's got the ball and he's looking at the situation. He's thinking, wow, this is just what we had hoped for. These guys only have 10 points. The number one thing, especially getting the ball coming back to start the second half, the number one thing on his mind most likely was the most important thing here is not that we get more points, it's that Kansas City gets no more points. And by point of comparison or history, last year in the AFC Championship game, when New England beat Kansas City out there, Bill Belichick did exactly the same thing. And he ran the ball 2 times in a row to run the clock down and not give it back to Mahomes. At that point, Andy Reid called 2 timeouts. On the third down play, Bill threw a screen pass, essentially a perimeter run, to keep the clock running, and it broke free. Now they were down in Kansas City territory. They hit an out and up for a touchdown. And if Kittle hadn't gotten the pass interference call, it would have worked out the same way for Shanahan. So I thought as an offensive play caller that it showed a maturity on his part, that he was thinking total game and not just, hey, let me call another play. So I think I understood. I had an insight into what he was trying to accomplish there, which was play to the strength of his defense and keep the points on Kansas City down. Don't let them get any more at the end of the half.
Al, I mentioned in your intro that you were an assistant with a Giants team that won a Super Bowl, and it just seemed as if that long halftime, that end of the first half, halftime, start of the second half, really kind of bit Kansas City again, the way it bit Buffalo back in Super Bowl 25 against that Giants team where, Mahomes didn't touch the ball for an hour, and it looked from the naked eye as if that kind of affected him and them in the third quarter. Is that something that when you're in the game and going in it's going to be a long halftime, but that it's almost like a completely different game, it seems, coming out of the locker room in the second half? Did you kind of sense that watching Mahomes and the Chiefs in the third quarter?
Yeah, you raise a really good point. There's no slide rule to calculate what difference that makes for players and for teams. But the NFL halftimes, being only 12 minutes as they are, they're so short during the regular season. So no sooner are you in, but you're back out again. And both mentally and physically, you really never turn it off. It's just it's just a slight break. It's like a coffee break instead of a full meal. And all of a sudden now you have this extended halftime, and you usually go in and your conversation is very going to be very crisp and very to the point. That's all you have time for. Well, you're used to coaching that way. You're used to hearing it that way as a player. You're not really all of a sudden going to start talking for 20 minutes instead of the 3 or 4 that you usually do. So there is just a lot of sitting around time on the part of the players, and I'm sure that that takes a lot of getting used to. I know it was a very unusual experience when we had to do it.
When you look at the Niners going forward, Al, what, if anything, would you change? Because it was so close, and everybody instantly wants to change things. And if they stop 3rd and 15, we're having a completely different conversation right now. But last year, the Rams were pretty damn close. That was an eerily good game as well, and they didn't make it back to the playoffs. So what advice would you give the Niners today?
Well, I think they're in a pretty solid position because they're strong where you need to be strong. They got an outstanding, that's too mild a word really, an outstanding defensive line that can play the current NFL game, put pressure on the quarterback, and they can run the ball with authority. And they're not as good a player as Garoppolo has the potential to be, and he can be a championship-level quarterback. They're not quarterback-dependent so much as the Rams were last year. Yes, they had a good running game, but it was really all about the quarterback and the passing game. This team is not quarterback-dependent, as they showed in the 2 previous playoff games. So they're going to be right there for a while, and I think you're exactly right. This is not a time to change things or tear things down. They just had to make a couple plays there, and it was really the speed of Tyreek Hill. I guess you'd say if you can get a safety who's as fast as Tyreek Hill, and that's pretty impossible to do, then maybe that's the change you want to make.
Well, Alan, you're a defensive guy, so I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. Arguably, those wideouts are the fastest collection of wideouts that a team has ever put together. Is there really any way to defend them other than how San Francisco did? Now, that's how their defense is built, but for the most part, they're a rush 4 team and play zone behind it, and go triple safeties if you can, play thirds. Is there really any other way to play that kind of speed? Because outside of trying to find 4 guys that can run 4 threes.
Well, the issue with that style of play, and it certainly has been effective for a number of teams, but the issue with that style of play, if there's a play where that front 4 does not get to the quarterback, then with that kind of speed and the ability to stretch the field in both directions, from sideline to sideline and end zone to end zone, then there are going to be holes in those zones. And the long pass play to Tyreek Hill that really changed the whole momentum of the game, that was one of those circumstances. Rush 4, don't get there, and too much speed to contend with. That I thought was the key issue going into the game. And it was that Tyreek Hill play when they had not enough pressure on the quarterback, and then they finally matched speed up on a vertical route against Richard Sherman, which he can't play on that track team. And those 2 things. So I'm a little bit more a proponent of playing some man-for-man coverage, being able to double some guys, bring some pressure, and get more heat on the quarterback. So that's their style of play. They took them a long ways, but eventually it wasn't sufficient to win the game.
With Kansas City, and like David said, the speed they had on receiver and the skill they have. Now, we already don't know. Sammy Watkins, who happens to be a South Fort Myers grad in our parts, has already made some claims. He's a free agent. We don't know where he'll be next year. But obviously Hill, Mahomes, Kelsey, the core of this team's back. We know the sky's the limit, but for Mahomes at this age, is there a thing that you think he has to what does he have to get better at, Al? And I know that's tough to say because right now we think he's the best quarterback on the planet, but he's also his 3rd-year starter, so there is room for improvement. Is there somewhere you see that he can even get better?
I think Andy Reid said it last night when he was asked the same question, so I'll use Andy's answer, and that is just exposure through repetitions and different games and experience, where the players like that get to the age level of experience-wise, say Joe Montana in his prime, Dan Marino, Tom Brady now, there's nothing a defense can show them that they haven't seen before. So now not only are those kind of quarterbacks beating the defense after the snap of the ball, a lot of times they're beating them before the snap of the ball, either by changing the protection, changing the route, or just knowing before the ball is ever snapped, this is what the coverage is going to be. Therefore, with the pattern that's called, this is where the ball is going to go, and now the ball starts coming out even faster. And with his delivery and the accuracy with which he can throw the ball, as he gets more and more looks, he'll become more and more dangerous, if that's believable.
Al, you were a coaching lifer. Your sons have gone into coaching and have had success. When you were watching the game yesterday, you've got the son of a coaching lifer on the one sideline, but then you've got Andy Reid, who had done everything but won the game that was played last night. Your thoughts when he finally won it, as somebody who has devoted a good chunk of his adult life to coaching and to football, just your thoughts on a coaching lifer finally winning the Super Bowl.
Well, yes, you're exactly right. They're actually, obviously both coaching families. In one case, Mike Shanahan, the head coach, and now his son, but Andy Reid, the head coach, and one of his sons coaches for him. So they are coaching families. I understand, I think, not only how Andy feels and how Mike Shanahan feels today, but I think as a family we understand how their wives and their children feel. And it really does affect your whole life. It's not just the outcome of a game. It's life-altering or life-living moments that you have. But as so many people have said, Andy is a genuinely good guy, sincere, honest. His integrity is at the highest level. And no matter what team you were rooting for or not have a rooting interest in the game, everybody can feel good about Andy Reid winning a championship.
Al, thanks for your time once again. We always appreciate it. Continued success with Westwood One, and hopefully we can talk again.
Well, I look forward to that. Always enjoy talking to you guys, and especially after a championship game, as I said, puts all football fans on a high.